There we go. So the panelists are already up here as if by magic. I don't know, are you comfortable where you're sitting? Do you want to come forward? Because you're in the lights, isn't it? I don't know. We can't get a voice from that. Right. So we've got Mark, Jamie, and Kenny. Don't forget. So up here we can see all the questions. I'll read them out for you, and you should have one mic between you. I'm just going to start with the one on the top. But yeah, really don't worry about it. I will read it out if that makes it easier. I think I can highlight it. Yeah. Okay, so this is for Laing. So Jamie, for you, can you tell us more about the challenges and conditions for success, for early engagement, and to ensure the MMC is embedded in the concept by the architect or engineer?
That's a good question. Maybe some of the challenges is that maybe they don't think they need to interact, and that it's just going to be something that happens by magic, and that there's a standard component set that they can just plug in and play. So I think the challenge is to get the knowledge out there that engagement is key, and that if you do engage and you do it early enough, then guess what? You can take something off the peg and you can plug and play and you're ready to go. So yeah, there's multifaceted question, I think. What else have we got?
The challenges and conditions for success.
Some of the challenges are architects of boundless imaginations. So maybe just try and keep people in. So talk to us early. Don't push the envelope too far. And maybe if Ray or Rote was here, would say push it a little bit further than anybody else thinks they can do, and then we'll find a way of doing it. So I think that answers the question. Whose question was it anyway? Because it's an anonymous one. Stick your hand up. Because you're getting struck off. You get right. It's right. It's a good question. Thank you. Did that answer your question?
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for that. Does anyone have anything to add to that, or? Don't worry, we will have more questions to go. Okay, so the next one. Where do you see the future of MMC going? Because we've been talking about the digitalization, we've been talking about how maybe IFS does it, and we heard from you about the kind of the benefits. But that's maybe where what we're doing already from especially yourselves. Where do you see the future? And also the challenges. And go ahead, all of you get a chance.
I think we're already on that journey into the future. I think we know what we need to do. It's just about the processes. The golden thread has been mentioned today a few times. It's having that communication, that standardization of how we're working with the data, and that working as one, which is not happening at the moment. It's very it's disjointed. That's the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's holding us back, people probably, culture, yeah, because that's probably the biggest barrier I think we face. You know, resistance to change, you know, because that is a challenge for this industry. You know, there's a lot of people been around a long time. I've always done it this way. Why would I want to change, right? And I see it with some of our customers. And why do I need to do a goods receive note? I mean, you get some pretty interesting questions sometimes. Why do I need to have a purchase order? You know, I mean, literally, I've heard that from major construction companies. So that's kind of why you're asking such a question, right? But that's still in the industry a lot, right? So I think we've got huge cultures to overcome in some organizations. Some are different, obviously. I think the other thing I would say is I think we've seen adoption of MMC in the manufacturing world at Laing, and where it's appropriate to have a factory and make that investment, which is quite challenging, right? That's fine, but that's kind of, those companies are already on that journey and probably quite advanced in their thinking, and Laing being a good example, right? I think there's less adoption for traditional contractors who say, well, they don't want to become manufacturers. They might buy modules from someone else, you know, components from somebody else, but they're not really yet thinking about how do you execute on a construction site in a structured way, right? In an assembly type mindset, right? And I think that's a massive leap from where we are now, right? Because I think we're only at the very, very beginning of that type of thinking. I mean, you're already doing installation as part of your mindset anyway, but it started at the design stage, you know, from how thinking about standardization. But if you're a traditional contractor and you're using 50 subcontractors, it's quite hard to work out how you actually organize yourself and the subcontractors to think differently as a group of people, isn't it? Right. And I think that's where it is difficult, right? But it has to be done, but that's where it's going to be. If we can, you know, you've probably heard like Jamie Johnson talking about some of the projects he's done in London, if you're on this game, and he's done some amazing things with assembly type structures on the construction site itself. And I think that's where we need to get to. And I think that's where the next part of this journey for me. So.
Is there anything to add?
I think it's tapping into a systems-based approach. I think that back in 2009, everything was reverse engineered. So this is the building that we want. This is the design intent. Can you make the precast work? Well, let's make the precast work with the design intent if you're early enough to market with that. Yeah, so if you come to the table, then I think that we can offer a systems-based approach and it be a hugely more efficient way of going to work than where we currently are in modern methods. But huge traction, and the more people talk about it, people must like MMC, that acronym, a little bit more than DFMA, because that seems to be gaining more traction than DFMA ever did, because this is not new. Yeah, we talk about it like it's a new thing. It's not, it's been around a while, but the more people are involved in the conversations, you know, the more traction it'll grow.
I think the challenge with the DFMA word has got the word manufacturing and assembly in it, and of course not everyone manufactures, right? And the majority will not manufacture. The majority will remain as contractors delivering something. So that's why I think the term doesn't always resonate, because I've had a conversation with one of my customers who will remain nameless, and I said, and the CFO said, if you think I'm effing opening a factory, you can think again, right? So that was kind of the mindset, and there's no reason for them to open a factory because that's not the business they're in, right? So, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't change the way they think about executing a project, right? So I think that's why MMC is a more generic term, right? But I've heard the word now being used. Industrialized construction seems to be the latest buzzword, so we'll see.
I think, thanks for that. I will close the question. The next one is pretty similar to what we've already had. So what do you think about, what do you think is holding back? I feel like we maybe already answered. So I will use the opportunity to ask my own question to you, Jamie, if you don't mind, about how many projects, now when you're interacting with new projects, do most people talk about this, or is this something that's driven by yourselves?
In what sort?
In terms of, do people say we want to build using modern methods of construction, or is it something you're saying, oh, great, you want to build this? Have you thought about, you know, kind of what's driving is it the customer or yourselves?
I'll answer that initially in so Ray O'Rourke built the factory because he wanted to manufacture in this manner. So for the best part of 10 years, we were just self-serving. So we just supplied into our own Laing O'Rourke projects in terms of install and main contractor. The last 5 years or so, we've been out in the market. So hence doing things like this, it's key that more people know and hear around it. The reason why we went to market is that you're quite right. It's very difficult to sustain a factory of 300 people, a huge size of a factory, when not every project is able to be delivered through modern methods of construction or DFMA with a LOR moniker. So the bridges that Phil touched on, I think that the efficiency and the speed and the more agile way of delivering a bridge is why have we not done that before? You know, it's why didn't we think to do that years ago? So more people are aware of it, therefore more people want it. And we very rarely now have to reverse engineer a build because everybody designs with, well, it's everybody. If you're prescriptive enough, then you can modularize it and it be far easier on inception. So things like this are great, and that more people are aware.
Oh, thank you. Just to give you, Jamie, a break, what is, because the next one's specifically for you, what is your view on pop-up manufacturing facilities, and what are the pros and cons compared to a permanent facility? So either of you, otherwise, taking you again.
Pop-up, yeah. It's not a term I've actually heard that much of. I mean, I'm guessing it means, you say, temporary, yeah. And I know they kind of have, I don't know what the concept there is, like Heathrow Airport is understood Terminal 5 had kind of assembly areas, assembly hubs, right? Where a kind of like pseudo assembly areas, manufacturings, which are maybe temporary, right? As opposed to having a full-blown factory. I think supply hubs is a great idea. I think the idea of doing assembly off the construction site doesn't necessarily have to be a permanent. It's probably a good idea, right? But then challenge, as you say, is when you start opening a factory, a proper factory with the big investment required, you know, you've got to have volume, right? Otherwise it doesn't. And that's where we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of companies fail, right? Who've entered open factories, and particularly in house building. We've got, I think, 3 customers who have gone into house building and pulled out, right? Because they haven't been able to make it work. But it's a volume problem. You know, there's not the predictable demand there to give a volume. And I think it was touched on this morning, unless the client or the government mandates and said, I'm going to give you a contract for all the bridges in Britain or something, then, you know, but that's how that's how the automotive and these other manufacturing, they have contracts where they're committing a supply to preferred suppliers, right? And then they got predictability of demand, and then they can make that commitment. And that's where we've got to get away from these short-term contract by contract by contract thinking. Otherwise, manufacturing becomes a big challenge, you know, permanent to make it pay. Yeah, so I think there's a place for both. Yeah.
I think also it can depend on the logistics and the size of the project, the nature of the project. Is it infrastructure or not? Or the timeline. For example, the Calm Valley Viaduct project that I showed you in my presentation, that had an on-site prefab facility that was making the different sections of the bridge, and it had the what's it called? The jig was going along, moving along, dropping the sections of the bridge in place, and there was hundreds of those, and there couldn't be any delay. Everything was geared up, ready at a certain time, date to install them. So that's where I think on-site pop-up manufacturing is useful and required.
Yeah, I can see the advantage of pop-up in that we can manufacture units that we're unable to deliver. In that, you know, you've got to get out on the road. We can manufacture a 4-meter tall sandwich panel, but then we can't deliver it. You know, I'm not saying that we pop up on site, but equally, you know, I think, yeah, I see that there's huge sense in terms of logistics. But don't pop up, send it through me. Yeah, send it my way.
Thanks for that. I think that really nicely leads into with the high profile failures. You mentioned that in MMC. How do we go about improving the image of offsite? Is it just a case of marketing success is better? What do you think?
I've got no negatives on my CV, so just again send it all through me. I think yeah, I get that. I think that we give assurance in that we're hugely digitally led. So I think that let's get the message out there, and that I mentioned a few times today already, we build it twice before we build it. So that's how I would answer that. I think that we give assurance that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do have to promote success, as you say. I mean, the press love to jump on failures, don't they? And tell everyone how bad it is sometimes. But I think, you know, there's always good reason. It's not because the factory is a failure, it's because of volume. I would say that's the number one reason. In house building, it's planning permission. It's the bureaucracy of planning permission that's stopping the volume happening fast enough, which makes it very difficult to build houses in a factory, right, and make it economically viable. So But the government, of course, want to build a lot more houses, but they're not dealt with the baggage that's stopping that process from happening at the front end, right? So, but yeah, we just have to keep on it. It's definitely going to happen, but there's going to be ups and downs along the way, along this journey, I guess, and we need to learn lessons from that and make sure we make the right decisions. So,
Andrew, does that answer your question, Andrew?
I guess Kenny touched it a little bit there, where
Do you want
there's
to?
probably more. There's probably more failures in traditional construction which don't get highlighted in the press as much. And it seems as though almost MMC offsite is perhaps unfairly targeted. I don't know. Is there more we can do?
I mean, most of the failures I've heard are probably been in modular house building, actually. I mean, it's, because steel structures, wooden structures, concrete, there's probably less failures in those type of worlds than there is in building whole or half houses, So I think most of the bad press has been around house building, actually, funnily enough, which is, you could argue, should be the easiest way to make money, but it's not that straightforward. Simply a demand problem. If somebody can commit to building 1,000 houses, whatever, a year through a factory, and you got a pipeline of work, absolutely no problem making money. So demand, predictable demand, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Thanks for that. Next on to something a bit different. Should universities be teaching product-led design / manufacturing for construction rather than traditional civil and structural engineering to encourage MMC? So should universities be leading this more?
Yes.
Second that.
Okay.
Yes, I believe they should. And I think that again, it's very, Laing O'Rourke see the need to go from trade to technicians, and that's something that we're very much promoting at the moment. And we should absolutely be doing that. Absolutely, yeah.
So yes, a consensus there. Laing O'Rourke. Jamie, one for you. Being familiar with concrete strength times, 28 days full strength. How long does it take for ovens to bake cast components at Explore Manufacturing? So
I'll take that one back with me, the baking of precast concrete. Yep. Right. So I've led that question, I guess, in that we have electrified our ovens once again. So in 2009, we did force cure. We went away from force curing because we're inducing shrinkage cracks. We've now created a humid environment in our ovens that we manufacture the twin wall and lattice. So generally 75mm thick biscuit. We need to reach 15 kilonewtons before lifting, before striking those. We can achieve that now within 10 to 12 hours. That pulls us back from 18, 20 plus. Yeah. So good question, and is a good sales pitch and something that I should have put in my slides. So yeah, we can bake in 10 to 12 hours.
excellent. I don't think, Kenny, you, yeah.
He's an expert in concrete. That's good.
We seem to be a long way off from the construction supply chain being integrated in one platform with live data. How do we move away from the curse, not course, but curse of Excel sheets?
I've got a simple answer to that. Buy IFS. There you go. Simple. But I think it does lie in having proper business systems, whether it's IFS or something else. These are things that every supply chain business in the world is doing in a proper way today, right? Except the construction industry, right? Retail, manufacturing. It's been 50 years of doing basic, normal picking, supply chain, moving things around. So there's not rocket science, right? There's no reason to not doing it as part of your normal integrated business system. None, right? In my opinion, other than traditional silo-based thinking. Yeah.
Good answer. Next question.
Okay, here we go. In terms of UK linear infrastructure, railroad, utilities, what is the productivity gap you see now generally? And what are the best examples now?
Do you want to give the microphone to maybe ask the question?
Oh, yeah,
So I
Barry.
can just
Is Barry here?
Yeah.
There you go. Please.
So I see a lot of buildings, yeah, and those kinds of things done with MMC. I don't, and we saw bridges earlier on, which is like a building within a linear infrastructure. But what's your experience in terms of roads, rail, pipelines, electrical cables, seeing that applied to MMC? It seems to be crying out for it in my mind, but I don't see a lot of it. So what do you think the productivity gap is? Or have you seen examples that you would like to share? Yeah.
the purpose for that was to give myself a little bit of thinking time for this. If you want to ask the question a little bit longer again, then it gives me a bit more. But I think, good question. I think that it's demand and maybe spotting that gap, in that it's very easy to sell why it's the right thing to modularize a bridge, in that power cables, disruption, and things like that. So I think there've been some soft attempts on road, but demand needs to be there. I think if I've not seen that, we're not seeing a lot of that, if I'm honest.
What do you think the gap is? It must be huge, no?
The gap is spotting the gap. So
Okay.
we're there. I think it is. I think it's that.
Okay. Someone's got it fine.
Oh, something else. No, you started something now, Barry. Is that there because if you try to change anything, you've got to raise a departure from standard? Is that? Do you think that's the reason?
It might be. I think if you try and apply such as modern methods to road, I think there need to be a huge number. You think how quickly you would be able to install something like that. I think that would outstrip our opportunity to supply. And then it's the storage that's required if you start manufacture 5 years before to be able to keep up. I think it's linear is the right point. I think in that it's got to be a linear sequence, and I think that's.
Phil's still with us there. Phil, you just put together a huge string of bridges. Did you have any issues with departures?
Come and sit here, Phil. I'll go.
I'll come and sit down here. I think departures are a blocker. We often have to get departures from clients on project by project basis. You can't get departure on a product basis to deploy across multiple projects. So clients need to try and look at things about how do I empower the supply chain to have something that's a departure that they can use on every single project that I have, rather than every single time I have a project you have to apply for a departure. I think some of the other, coming back to Barry's point as well, I think those projects involve a lot of ground interfaces. So when you get out the ground, then MMC becomes something that's easy to, people can visualize what that's easy to do. I think we need to start thinking about modernizing a process in the ground. So that, digging a pipeline is, you still get your excavators in there. You're still muck shifting for huge number of kilometers to put new pipes in. Until someone starts to change that technology and integrate that with the installation of the pipes and the other utilities, then you're stuck with an excavator digging a trench. So I think there's definitely something around methods rather than, I think MMC tends to lean itself back towards offsite manufacturing as a product. I think we've got to look at automation of on-site processes in combination with offsite manufacturing.
Thank you. Thanks for joining the party. Yeah, I know we have like a fraud question in here. Everyone can just have a read, think to themselves. Yeah, exactly. I feel like it might start some fights, so I'm just going to move on to the next one, okay? A gentle soul. Who owns the business processes that need to change? Who owns the business processes that drive the need to change for MMC to take off?
I would question that. I think he already has taken off. I think that we've seen Laing doing it for 15 years. I think everybody's a stakeholder in this, continue to gain traction. I think, as I said, I think it's early engagement and it's us having the right conversations at the right time that make that build intuitive rather than having to come backwards a few steps because we've not engaged at the right point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit like the BIM thing. I think maybe there needs to be, and the government are always, I understand, are already pushing an MMC agenda with people like Jamie Johnson and embracing that for the type of assets that make sense, in prisons and hospitals and schools and all that. It just makes no sense not to do that for those types of things in my head. And it's back to that demand thing. It's the same with BIM. When BIM took off, it was because of the government mandated it, right? And I spoke to one of our customers, like, 15 years ago or something, the engineering director said to me, "Can you help me get the BIM badge?" Right? That was the exact words, right? Because it was like, I need that badge so I can win business. And this becomes the same, right? If every contractor was told you ain't going to win the business unless you're MMC compliant, right? That doesn't mean you have to have a factory. It just means you have to execute in a particular way with a certain set of processes, then the world would change, right? Well, for government contracts. So I think certainly the government has a role to play in making this drive from the other end, because otherwise it's people like us pushing it to the industry, trying to persuade people to change,
Right.
Yes, I just saw the question.
It leads on nicely.
I can't bring it back, unfortunately. And don't post it again. How do you see government organizations driving MMC requirements? TfL, DFL, Network Rail. Do they do that currently, etc.?
I think we're seeing it in prisons. We have got quite a high level of repetition. One house blocks similar to the next and the next and the next. So huge positive steps in that regard. TfL, I don't know. Look, Ray had to buy a GRC factory to help deliver Crossrail because there wasn't enough capacity in the GRC world to be able to do it. So, we've got a little bit of a journey to go on. I'll take the positives. 10 years ago, we had standardization in schools. That's maybe less so now. Prisons are the next thing. Yeah, I think the drive to standardization makes sense when you start questioning the pound. And if you say that you can save a few pound by building it the same as the last one, then maybe that's a bit more of the sensible thing to do.
The only thing I'd add to that is don't forget they want to reduce our carbon footprint, and the sustainability goals is all going to contribute massively to that as well.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions from the audience that you want to post, or I can just come around? Do you guys want to leave everybody with like a final thought, or no? You don't have to. You don't have to. If that's the case. Yeah. I tried. Thanks everybody for attending the panel session. I think we've got about 4 minutes until we come back here for the closing. But thanks everyone. Thanks, and thanks to the panelists.